multipolar neuron, right? And do you remember these? Dendrites, cell body, axon, and you see the axolemma, and then you have the not yet myelin sheath, and then the neurolemma. Yeah, and this is a cross section of your Schwann cell. Yeah, that's the one that makes the myelin. So this is a better one for the actual Schwann cell because it's very closely adhering, and yeah, and it's clearly the one that ensheaths, right, and the one that makes the myelin sheath. So yeah, this is a good one as well. All right, because I just found it when I was looking for the spinal cord ones. Okay, so just to orient you, you guys recall your vertebral, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
Wait.
spinous process, yeah. Okay. And then the body, and do you recall that there's a hole in the middle, and that's basically where the spinal cord goes through, right? So the vertebral foramen. And so you see there, and it should make sense why it's very important for you to have that foramen, and also for the lateral foramina, remember the ones that are on the side? That's where your spinal nerves will go through, okay, which I also showed you with that big model back there, okay? But just so you have a perspective as to how important it is for the relationship between the skeletal system as well as the nervous system in this, because usually we associate the skeletal system with a muscular system, but this is a good depiction of how those would really play a role together, okay? And then this one is going to be a cross-section, and this is the three-dimensional view of this, like a magnified view. And if you recall, I talked about, it's kind of like a butterfly shape. I like butterflies, that's why I made it that way for the model. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, you remember how there are two parts, right? What?
I said Mariah Carey.
Oh. No, I was first. Okay. So this was remember the two matters? The gray matter and the white matter. Do you remember the difference between the two?
The axons.
Where would you find the myelinated axons?
In the white
matter. And then the gray matter would have the cell bodies, right? And some dendrites. Okay. And these are your spinal nerves, the ones that have, what do nerves have? Axons, right? And basically they're a group of axons that are traveling together to and from, the central nervous system, okay? Because there are some that are carrying sensory, remember the afferent, so they're approaching, so they're from the periphery to the central, and then the motor ones will be from the central to the peripheral, okay? So just to illustrate that even further, is this clear?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. This is color-coded, and we mentioned that this is your
gray matter,
and then you have the outer white matter. In the brain, it's the opposite, right? The outer part is the gray matter, and then the inner part's the white matter, okay? All right, so these spinal nerves, the ones that we saw here, is very well represented here, okay? This is the ventral side, and this is the dorsal side, which means this is the front, and this is the back, right? Okay. And then, let's see. These wires, remember how we were talking about if you have axons that are traveling together here in the central nervous system, what do you call those? Tracts, exactly. And then if they're traveling, you have several tracts traveling together, they're going to be called column. Okay. So this one, for example, it's a general somatic afferent. Let's break that down. Somatic meaning pertains to the voluntary portions, right? And then afferent. So what direction is that going? It's entering, right? So this is the direction of the impulse right here. Okay? From the periphery to the central. What about the general visceral afferent?
Still approaching.
It's approaching, and it's coming from the involuntary parts, right? Like the innards, right? The cardiac muscle, the stomach, the intestines, all those. Now we said that if it's afferent, It's approaching, right? You got that right. What kind of information is this sending? Sensory, exactly. Right? So hopefully you see that, okay? And if you notice, where does the sensory go through? It's going through the back door, right? The dorsal side. Remember dorsal? Yeah? Okay. And do you remember what a ganglion is? Thanks for your honesty. Okay, anyone? The ganglion. Think of it as a gang of cell bodies. Yes. Where do you find it?
Peripheral.
Outside of the central. Exactly. These are cell bodies. They are found outside the central nervous system. So you would call this a ganglion. Yeah, and this is your dorsal root ganglion. Okay? Make sense? Which one? This one. See that picture? It depicts your cell bodies.
So it's found
For
outside,
those-
it's called a gang.
Yes, that's why it's
If
called
it's
a
found
ganglion.
inside,
If it's found inside,
it's called
Mm-mm.
Center.
The one that's confusing because it's also named
Oh,
after
nucleus.
the nucleus. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah?
Yes.
Make sense?
The little ball structure on your actual model up top. Your model,
Yeah, this
that's
one.
the-
That's it, exactly. Which should make sense that it's bulbous, right? Because it's got a bunch of cell bodies. Exactly. Right? Is that cool how it's coming together with a lecture? Yeah. So I'm glad that we have this on there. So again, this is a dorsal root ganglion because it's on the back side, and it's called a ganglion because what's inside there? A bunch
Gang
of
of
cell
Gang of
bodies.
cells.
Yeah, cell bodies, exactly. Okay, and the direction is coming from the periphery, and then,
central
and remember what kind of cells are usually found, what kind of neurons?
sensory,
Right, but then the structure of it,
somatic,
pseudo
pseudo.
unipolar. Remember, the sensory are mostly like that.
What was it?
The pseudo unipolar.
Pseudo.
That's a most of the sensory. That was in one of the slides. Most of the sensory are pseudo unipolar, and that should make sense because the cell body is right over here. But for example, if you're carrying impulses from right here, so you're going to see the afferent neurons going all the way, right? Remember how? Okay, let me show you that so that you have better picture of here. Remember the pseudo unipolar one? Remember that? And then we mentioned that the yeah, it's in there.
There's nowhere.
I can't find it right.
Refer
Oh,
back
here.
refer back to lecture notes.
See, sensory neurons, remember in the slide, of the peripheral nerves are usually pseudo-unipolar, okay? And again, we mentioned that in the lecture earlier. See how the dendrites and then you have the axon and the cell body's not until later, right? That's why. So you can imagine that the dendrites are way over here, so let's say it's coming from there. Right from here, and it's going all the way, and then the cell body of that particular neuron is not going to be found until here, right before
It
reaches the spinal cord. But this is already the axon that's carrying, because guess what? This is a nerve, right? Right? And what do nerves have? Axon. Okay? And then it's traveling through, and then eventually it's going to go upwards to the brain, to the somatosensory cortex. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. What about the black and the red one? So it says the black one, general somatic efferent. Now this time it's going from the central nervous system to the periphery, right? Okay. So that is basically coming from the motor cortex down, and then it's exiting. Take a look, the ventral, right? It's coming out through the ventral side. But see how this is one? See how they're kind of joining forces? Remember the cables that we were talking about? The electric cables? Usually, whether or not it's going that way or this way, they're usually in one pack, right? They're traveling together. So same thing. We know that the axons here are carrying impulses too. We know that these are carrying impulses outwards, but at some point they're going to be traveling together in that particular spinal nerve that's emanating there, or that particular nerve, whatever it may be. Okay?
But they're always separated because they don't cross paths.
Well, they have distinct, remember, so now we go back to this one. They're not going to crisscross applesauce. They're not going to crisscross the messages because this is wrapped.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
They're in
Yeah,
columns.
like a turkey wrap. Okay?
Like what? In columns? No, they're columns.
Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. Because they're still physically distinct from each other. They're just traveling together. Okay? All right. So then if you follow this, it can go all the way and maybe lead to that thumb right there. And maybe the opponent's pollicis is the one that's going to be innervated. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And general visceral efferent. What would the general somatic efferent, actually I already said the answer, but what will it innervate? Yeah, the voluntary muscles, right? And then the general visceral efferent would be
Involuntary.
the involuntary, like the cardiac muscle, right? Your sphincters that are involuntary and things like that. Okay? Does that make sense? So hopefully that solidifies what we talked about in lecture. Because in lecture, you guys kind of got it, but this helps to visualize it and to actually see the relationship. Okay? One way that, because sometimes it's hard to remember, like which one's on the dorsal. I tell my students, you can say, how many of you know what a Nintendo DS is? Yeah? Dorsal, sensory, right? Okay.
DSIXL.
Giovanna, strike two, okay? Okay, does that make sense? So, because remember the